No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's late evening here in the UK on the 27th of April 2022. Yeah, by the way, if you're one of my old subscribers and you don't like the new direction that I'm taking this channel, then please feel free, unsubscribe, because I am going in a new direction. I'm not talking about drama around grape apologists from the past. Those people are irrelevant to me. It's from years ago and it's no longer around. So, what's been reported as happening in the Ukraine-Russia war today? Or in the last 24, 48 hours? Well, to tell the truth, not much. There's been lots of skirmishes, quite a bit of fighting, a bunch of dead people from both sides. But separately, most people seem to be interested in reports of 1. Which EU countries will pay for gas in Russian rubles and therefore continue to receive this black gold commodity, and for which Russia will continue to receive much more Western money, or much more money from the West, than they ever have received before. 2. Poland and Bulgaria refuse to pay in rubles, and they've had their gas and oil supplies cut off. The impact of that immediately today on that news is allegedly, a 15% increase in the price of gas or oil. Number 3. Ukraine continues to lose manpower and strongholds, slowly and surely. They are making some gains, they are making some losses, but it's all very slow. It all seems to have slowed down a bit on the front at the moment. I don't know whether that's because Ukraine have become stronger, they've put their better armies in place, or Russia have pulled back a little bit. Or maybe the front is just too long for Russia. They can't keep it all under control and advance as fast as possible. Or has Russia decided to give its people on the front line a bit of a break, a bit of a 2 weeks R&R before they get back to it? Who knows? I haven't got a clue. I don't know. The West continues to supply more arms, tanks, munitions, missiles, etc. to Ukraine, and it all keeps getting blown up on the way. It's all a bit strange, really. The United States has allegedly, again, already supplied Ukraine with 35% of its stockpile of military paraphernalia. And they've probably only got about 6 months left of stocks if they keep on supplying Ukraine in this manner, and if Russia keeps blowing it up before Ukraine actually gets it. The other bit that's really interesting that seems to be happening is that Russia keep capturing a lot of these munitions and tanks and arms and missiles and anti-tank weapons and javelins. So they'll be able to use them back against the Ukraine, which all seems very strange to me. That report is according to Bloomberg, that 35% of US's stockpile of military stuff that they're sending has been used up. What they also say in Bloomberg is that there are no contracts in place to replace the stuff that's being sent to Ukraine. So the old adage of follow the money does seem a bit strange, really. If there's no contracts to actually produce new stuff, who's making the money out of this? It really does seem like it's an ideological thing, don't you think? Bit of an ideology from USA. It's Russia, we've got to fight them. Anything Russia does, we've got to go against them. Yeah, but it has led, there has been an interesting statement by an American official. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they're from the Ministry of Defense in America. That America is willing now to consider a negotiated settlement where Ukraine stays neutral and will have no connection to NATO in the future. That seems to be quite a reasonable outcome to me. But it does require Ukraine and Russia to get around a table and come to a diplomatic solution, of which Russia has found over the past 8 years that every time that they do that, Ukraine agrees to anything and everything, and then they never implement it. They just lie through their teeth. They don't give a shit. There's not a lot of what's the word? Principles. They're just quite happy to lie, constantly lie, straight to the face of the people that they don't like. What else has happened? An American that's been imprisoned in Russia for a while and a Russian that's been imprisoned in the United States for a while have been exchanged. There's been an exchange of these two people. The American imprisoned in Russia was a student who got drunk one night and started fighting with some Russian policemen. And the Russian was imprisoned in Liberia and then was extradited to America and accused of spying or something. But they've been exchanged. So there's two people there who may or may not be dangerous, who may or may not be innocent, who may or may not be silly and stupid. They have been exchanged. They've been given back to their countries. So there's still at least some kind of semblance of diplomacy going on here. Separately, from the UK, my Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says he's not interested in helping the 2 UK soldiers that have been captured by Russia, Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner. He's not interested in helping them in any way, shape or form at all. Reports state that Boris Johnson says they were illegally over there and shouldn't have been there. So he's not giving a damn about them. They'll have to deal with it themselves. So this is red pill stuff. Take personal responsibility. So I think what else he said, if I remember right, was something along the lines that if there was any discussion about releasing these two people for the pro-Russian Ukrainian politician, or he might actually be Russian, I can't remember the guy's name, it's up to Ukraine as to whether they get involved in that negotiation. And Ukraine have basically told Russia to F off. Probably because they've beheaded the guy already. I don't know. They might have done, they might not have done. He might just be beaten up. He might be sat up eating caviar and drinking champagne. I haven't got a clue. I don't know what's happening with this guy at all. But he's a big mate of Putin's. And the idea that they would give him up for 2 bits of British cannon fodder is like, well, yeah, can't see it myself. Can't see it. Separately, Emmanuel Macron, he's been pelted with tomatoes near Paris. Apparently, allegedly. I think that's funny myself. I don't know whether it's true. Haven't got a clue. Haven't got the faintest idea. One of the big things that that seems to be coming out today and yesterday is this area in Moldova called Transnistria. It's a breakaway republic in Moldova. It's majority ethnic Russian, and it wants independence. It might have had a referendum to claim independence. And as such, it's being targeted by, quotes, terrorists. That might be the Moldovan government. It might be Ukraine. It might be Romania. It might be just volunteer militias. It might just be people who are going, we don't like you. We don't want you here, but you're not allowed to just go away. We've got to bomb the shit out of you. I don't know. Basically, everyone's worried that Russia will get involved, but Russia is a bit bogged down at the moment over in Nikolaev, just south of Nikolaev. They haven't taken Nikolaev yet in Ukraine. They haven't got anywhere near Odessa yet in Ukraine, and they would really need to take those two areas in order to be able to have any way of getting to Transnistria. And if you've seen anything of Transnistria, it is a long, long, long border. It's a bit like the Baja California in Mexico, or the Baja California, however you pronounce it. It's a very long strip. It's a part of Moldova. And it will be exceptionally difficult for Russia to get involved and to actually do anything for those people. The only thing that they could really do is put in place a humanitarian corridor across the south of Ukraine to get these people out from there. I cannot see how, in any way, shape or form, Russia will be able to help those ethnic Russians that are over in Moldova. But so, you know, everyone is worried that Russia will get involved, except this guy called Arestovich. Arestovich is the political advisor to Zelensky in Ukraine. He's his main guy, his main advisor. And this Russian involvement is exactly what he wants. He wants Ukraine to go into Moldova and take over that area. He wants his own people to go in and take over Transnistria, which will force Russia to come in. But what Arestovich wants to do when they've taken over and protected this area of Moldova is to hand that area to Romania. Romania being a NATO country, of course. So if Russia was to then attack Transnistria when it was held by Romania, being a NATO country, NATO's concept of someone attacks one of us, we all defend them, it will end up as World War III. This is what they want. He's desperate for Russia to fight against NATO, because that'll basically be the end of the bloody world. It really will. I'll tell you what. Let's have a listen to what Arestovich, the political advisor to President Zelensky, said back in 2019. This is from a guy called Stanislav Yelin. Stanislav Yelin. He's a YouTuber. I don't know exactly where he's from. I can't actually find his channel to be able to provide his a link through to it, so you won't see it in my description. But this is an absolutely fantastic video. He's speaking in English. But the thing is, you need to remember what's about to come out close to the beginning of this video is from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, 2019. Let's have a listen.
This video will be eye-opening to some because mainstream media in the West constantly calls this military operation or war unprovoked, and that Russia is only interested in domination and not the protection of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. There are hundreds of videos of citizens from Mariupol saying that it was the UA army, Azov battalions, and the right sector who were shooting them in cold blood. You're probably asking, why? It's not possible for a country to be using their citizens as bait, as a means to an end, to accomplish a goal, no matter the cost.
And I'm sure we've all seen those sorts of reports. The only atrocities are being committed by Russia, as we all know, because our mainstream media across the world is preventing us really from hearing the other side, and they're all lockstep together. Now, I've never ever seen this before, although there are a few little holes that are starting to come through in certain areas. One of them being Austria having said that they will veto Ukraine joining the EU. And there are others that are doing little things, and I just think that those bits are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's going to be some interesting stuff coming up in the next 6 months as this continues. But yeah, basically what Stanislav has said here is everything Ukraine says good, good, good. Everything Russia says bad, bad, bad. And don't question it.
Well, what I'm about to show you, at a minimum, will get you thinking or change your mind entirely. It is very important to share, comment, react to, and like this video because the information needs to be known. Also, subscribe to my Telegram and my Yandex Zen account. Links are in the description below. The person in the video is not a random blogger. He is Alexei Aristovich. Look him up. He is the advisor to the president of UA, to Zelensky.
С вероятностью 99,9% наша цена за вступление в НАТО – это большая война с Россией. А если мы не вступим в НАТО, это поглощение России в течение 10-12 лет. Вот и вся вилка, в которой мы находимся. А теперь давайте выбирайте Зеленского.
Подождите, теперь если поставить чашу на весах, а что лучше в таком случае?
Конечно, крупная война с Россией и переход в НАТО по результатам победы над Россией.
Let me just go back a little bit to the words that are in there. Wait a second, what's better in this situation? He answers, of course, a big war with Russia. That's what's better. Becoming part of NATO as a result of winning against Russia. That's what's better. This was 3 years ago. This is the advisor to President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. This was in 2019. The advisor to Zelensky was saying the way to become a member of NATO is to have war with Russia, a big war, and get everybody on our side.
Конечно, крупная война с Россией и переход в НАТО по результатам победы над Россией.
Что такое может быть крупная война с Россией?
Ну, это воздушная операция наступательная, вторжение российских армий, вот 4, которые они создали на наших границах, там осада Киева, попытка окружить войска.
And of course, this is exactly what's happened. Invasion from the air. Well, not necessarily invasion from the air, but Russia pretty much cut off Ukraine from having the airspace. But there has been quite a lot of air attacks or attacks from the air by Russia. The various armies have moved in. They did at first encircle Kiev. Now, of course, that was done with their weakest troops, their brand new conscripts, their brand new contracts, people who had no experience whatsoever. Anybody remember that tank that went round a corner and suddenly veered into a car, made a massive left turn and landed on top of a car, and then didn't carry on going, just stayed on top of this car? That reminds me a people who don't really know what they're doing. It looked like an accident, a complete accident by somebody that had complete incompetence and just what did they got scared about something. They pressed the wrong lever, because of course it's two levers in a tank. It's not a steering wheel. They pressed the wrong lever and ended up crushing a bloody car. Thankfully, the person that was in the car, who was a standard old civilian, was able to just get out and actually walk away. I don't know how. I haven't got a clue how. But that's exactly what happened. An attempt to encircle the troops currently fighting in the Donbass. I love the way that he's actually said this. Encircle the troops currently fighting in the Donbass. Why are they fighting? Because Poroshenko, the president back in 2014, sent these militias, the Azov battalion, the Aidar battalion, the Donbass battalion, these particularly militant ultra-nationalist Nazis, sent them over there to genocide the civilian population of the Donetsk and Luhansk republics. And I say republics because they had just had a referendum that gave them independence, for want of a better word. Some people say it's not independence, they were looking for self-rule. Other people say they just wanted autonomy and they still wanted to be part of Ukraine. I don't think that's actually true. I think it was for independence. They wanted to be aligned completely with Russia and to be taken out from Ukraine. And that's because they had spent years being denigrated and treated like shit by Ukraine. So what did Poroshenko say? He said, you will have no money, you will have no pensions. So he cut off SWIFT bank accounting. He cut off the ability for these people to receive their pensions that they had earned over 50 years working for the state. He turned off the Russian language from being allowed to be used. And so all the civil servants in those areas lost their jobs because they couldn't speak Ukrainian. And what he also said was, our children here in the Western Ukraine will go to schools, your children will live in basements. How does he guarantee that? He guarantees that by sending Nazi battalions to basically lob in missiles and to sniper and to machine gun people as they're walking down the street.
Которые в АТО находятся, ВОЗ, в операции Объединенных сил «Прорыв» через Крымский перешейк, выход на Новокаховское водохранилище, чтобы воду в Крым дать. Наступление с территории Беларуси, там, создание новых народных республик, диверсии, удары по объектам критической инфраструктуры и так далее. Воздушно-десантный. Вот что такое полноценная война. И вероятность ее 99%.
Когда?
После 21-22 самое критическое.
The probability of this war happening is 99% sometime in 2021-2022. Ukraine was actually not only planning for this, but trying its best to actually make it happen. And that's because they were annihilating the civilian population of the Donbass and the Luhansk regions. 14,000 people dead. If you get the chance, look up the OHCHR reports on war atrocities. They were published quarterly from 2015 onwards. You can look at the OSCE reports. Now, of course, they've all changed since the start of this war, since the beginning of 2022. No longer will you hear of Ukrainian atrocities and Ukrainian genocide against the people over there in Donetsk and Luhansk.
20-22 самые критические эти самые.
Did you get that? Seriously, did you? I mean, an open war with Russia is better than being absorbed into Russia. This is the advisor to Zelensky in March of 2019, 2 months before Zelensky became the president. And again, absorbed into Russia, This was when the Minsk agreements that were meant to bring peace to all citizens of UA were still on the table. And in those agreements, the Lugansk and Donetsk republics were supposed to be part of UA. Go ahead, link is in the description below. Read those agreements and understand them. Understand every point. But why not neutrality? What is wrong with staying neutral? Considering the fact that at least 22% in UA identify themselves as ethnic Russians, not just Russian speakers. Zelensky knew back in 2019 that absorption into NATO would cause this conflict, and in December 2021, Putin said NATO deploying its troops and weapons to UA represented a red line for Russia and would trigger a strong response.
What's interesting here is that Stanislav Yelin mentions the Minsk agreements. So there was two Minsk agreements. First of all, there was the Minsk Protocol, and then there was Minsk II. Poroshenko was the prime minister at the time in Ukraine. He met with Putin both times. One was at the end of 2014 or middle of 2014. The other one was early in 2015. And Poroshenko agreed to everything and signed it off. And then, having left the room, immediately let his armies, his militias, Aidar, Azov, Donbass, C-14, Right Sector, unleash untold amounts of missiles and devastation onto the civilians of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Now, all of this is fully documented. You can find a lot of this stuff. You can find a lot of stuff about these battalions on old information that is within mainstream media articles. You get it from Reuters, you can get it from the BBC, you can get it from the Guardian. You'll probably be able to get it if you're listening in a different country from your own mainstream medias. It's very clear that even though the number of people that politically supported such hard right ultra-nationalist organizations are really small, these voluntary militias, voluntary ultra-nationalist, militant nationalist, anti-anything that's not Ukrainian, anti-Jew, anti-Pole, anti-Russian, pro-white, white power militias and people suddenly were being paid by the government. They became part of the establishment. And that's where the problem is. The big problem is the state. They are part of the state. And this whole ultra-nationalism aspect, this fascism, has fed through into their secret police, into their National Guard. That's exactly how all of them treat things. Interestingly, the general Western Ukraine army seems to work along the lines of the Geneva Convention. There have been many captured prisoners of war, captured Russian prisoners of war, who have ended up being treated very well. They didn't have a clue what they were there for. Of course, as I said, there was a lot of conscripts, very, very new conscripts and contracted people into the Russian army that were sent to the borders of Ukraine on the pretext of it's just some routine stuff that you're doing over there. You're just going through maneuvers, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly they were in Ukraine and in a war. They did not want to be there. They didn't understand anything about it. They hadn't been told anything about it. And they sure didn't want to shoot people and kill people. And so there's been a number of wars going on here. And for me, that was all a feint. All of it. All that stuff around Kiev and Bucha and Izium at the beginning, that was all a feint to keep the big Western Ukrainian army thinking that that was the main incursion, while Russia actually brought their professional soldiers, their hardened soldiers, down to the Donbass regions so that they could fight against Azov and Aidar and Donbass, C-14 and right sector.
But let's go back to 2008, April 4th, NATO conference in Romania, Bucharest. At the Bucharest summit, NATO allies welcomed UAE's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership and agreed that those countries will become members of NATO. And in the same year, Georgia, the country, ignites a conflict with Russia. Russia marches towards Tbilisi but does not take over Georgia. So unprovoked? Really? I mean, over 14 years of color revolutions, troop training, and funding of the UA war machine, this is unprovoked? I don't think so, but you decide. Now listen to the same person in 2022 after the operation began.
Чому не можна було оголосити Україні, що Росія точно нападає, коли ми вже знали, що нападає? Тому що почалась би масовий вихід біженців, масований. І вони б забили всі дороги. Це було 8, 10, 12 мільйонів людей. І армія би не пройшла в райони оборони.
So what he's just said there is the president of Ukraine and his advisors and the government did not tell the people of Ukraine, while the rest of the world was talking about it, was talking about the fact that Russia had brought troops right to the edge of Ukraine. Russia had amassed its troops in 3 or 4 different areas along the border with Ukraine. And of course, Russia said, we're just doing maneuvers, we're just doing some training. And everybody was quite clear that that wasn't true. But it appears that this guy, Arestovich, the advisor to the president, is saying they did not tell their people about it. And the reason that they weren't telling their people about it was because everybody would run and it would block up all of the roads. And in this little bit here, it would be a complete paralysis of the road networks. What he says next is fascinating.
Понімаєш, да? Це повний параліч доріг. В цьому випадку це дуже бажана ситуація для російського воєнного керівництва. І в цій ситуації ми, напевно, програвали війну і лівобережжя все. Тому що з лівого берега пішли б на правий, 50 мостів всього в Україні. Було б забите все, жодним чином ми не впоралися з цією ситуацією. Єдиний вихід – танками давити власних громадян, розстрілювати, щоб пройти через мости.
Did you understand that? They could have warned their own citizens, but they didn't. Because if they did, they would have to run them over with tanks or shoot them to get to the front. Their own citizens, even though they already had thousands of troops at the front and they had at least 3 years to prepare. And here is the most horrible part. With every civilian casualty, more sanctions are put upon Russia and more lethal military aid is sent to UA from Europe and the US. Now, if the UA is willing to run over their own civilians and their own citizens with tanks to win this war, think about what they're willing to do to those 22% who identify themselves as ethnic Russians, or those who work or welcome Russian troops. Do you get it now? Do you get who benefits directly from the massacres such as the one that happened in Bucha? Do you understand that every civilian death only brings more aid to UA from the West? Do you now understand why thousands of civilians from Mariupol are saying that the army of UA, Azov, and the right sector have been using them as human shields? Because they were left there by their own government to be human shields, and that is disgusting. Now you will say that I'm a bot of the Kremlin spewing propaganda, and who you believe is entirely up to you. But I'm going to leave you with one final video from Arestovich.
Непрерывная война. Это военный лагерь. Осажденная крепость. Это должен быть военный лагерь. Да, то есть все должны ходить, как в Израиле, с оружием. Основные 20% национального бюджета на войну. Дети с детства знают, и старики знают, что если что, плохо будешь воевать, конец. И так далее. То есть мы должны быть таким Израилем в квадрате. Подождите, но мы не являемся Израилем в квадрате. А это означает что? Что мы врем себе. Национальная идея Украины, одна из центральных национальных идей Украины, это как можно больше врать себе и другим. Потому что если сказать правду, рухнет все. И надо придумать что-то другое.
Lie as much to ourselves and to others as we can. What else was it that he said next? Lie as much as possible to ourselves and others. That is one of the central ideas, the national ideas of Ukraine. This is the political advisor, the head honcho that advises the president of Ukraine. Because if we tell the truth, everything will collapse and we will have to make up something else. If this is not opening your eyes to the concept that you have been fed propaganda and bullshit for however long it is regarding Ukraine, but it's been pretty much most of my life in relation to NATO and the rationale for NATO and the threat that comes to our societies, our liberal, democratic Western societies that just happen to be the ones that start wars and that destabilize countries and that go into countries and have more wars than anyone else under the pretext of stuff which is later found to be a load of bullshit. And then we just go, forget it. We'll just get on with our lives. We need to start opening our eyes to what type of society we actually live in. We have this idea that we have a free press. We have this idea and this concept that we are the West. We are the free liberal democracies. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom from oppression. We've got none whatsoever. We've just been bloody brainwashed all our lives, right from the beginning. NATO was set up with the sole intention of preventing the expansion of the USSR. That was the first aspect of it. When the USSR disappeared in 1991, suddenly NATO has got an existential crisis. So it then has to expand into other bits, and now it's decided Russia is a threat. And how much time do we hear of Russia being a threat? Russia is a threat. We've got to deal with Russia. We've got to sort Russia out. China is a threat. We've got to sort China out. And it's all because we're scared of losing our place at the top of the bloody podium. They are not much of a threat and never have been. They just get on with their lives. And what they do is they defend themselves in exactly the way that they need to. It's unbelievable. It really is.
Потому что если сказать правду, рухнет все. И надо придумать что-то другое.
And to those people of UA in my comment section, this is your leadership. These are their words. And I hope peace comes as soon as possible. And every civilian death is a tragedy. But to me it is clear that every civilian death in UA directly, financially and morally benefits only one party in this war. And it's not Russia. So the decision who you believe is entirely yours. See you in the comments below.
So that was that set of information. Make of it what you will. I have my opinions, you will have your opinions, and we're allowed to have different opinions. But the problem that I see is the more that we, the West, supply ammunitions and stuff to kill people to Ukraine, the more that people will die. The bottom line is the people of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions voted to leave Ukraine back in 2014, and they have been labelled terrorists and separatists ever since then, and Ukraine has sent their ultranationalists, which they have then brought into the state apparatus, down there to bomb civilians. And they've been very successful at that. They've killed 14,000 of them up to the start of this war, and a lot more have died since then. But let's get back to what else has been happening. So, another one of the interesting things that have been happening over the last couple of days is discussions between Putin and the United Nations Secretary. I think it's Gutierrez. And Putin appears to have laid out clearly why he feels he was justified in his special operation, in quotes. And he had no option but to protect ethnic Russians in Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics after 8 years of attempted genocide by those Nazi battalions that I have gone on and on and on and on and on about already, who are in the employ and paid by and part of the state and the government of Ukraine. Putin made it clear to Gutierrez that when Kosovo declared independence, and I think that was from Yugoslavia, was it? Was it Yugoslavia? It might have been some of the other countries from down there. I'm not exactly sure who they declared independence from. The United Nations actually praised Kosovo, and NATO and the rest of the world acknowledged Kosovo's independence. Kosovo didn't even have a referendum. On the other hand, the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk did have referendums, overwhelmingly voted for independence. Ukraine sent their Nazi volunteer militias to annihilate those citizens, and now we are backing them. We are backing a genocide, all because these civilians living in Ukraine are ethnic Russians. And because nobody else would go in and help them, so Russia had to and did. And Russia uses the refrain, they are gone into Ukraine to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And I see that that is a very, very strong justification. So, after 8 years and some 14,000 deaths, the United Nations, NATO, the West, the United States, the UK, the EU, the so-called liberal democracies, the upholders of right and law, they decided to jump up and down and support those Nazis against the Russians. Anyone who is against Russia is good, right? Except in World War II. Talking of World War II, did you know that West Germany joined the NATO alliance in 1955? West Germany, 10 years after World War II. DW says no mention that USA is sending weapons to Nazis. Yes, they are. That was a lot of all the beginning of what I said. It's not just USA. 10 years after the end of World War II, which was about fighting Nazis, and Russia was, or the USSR at the time, was one of our allies. It was always a difficult arrangement, but they were still allies. West Germany joined NATO in 1955. NATO, the organization that was set up, the coalition of countries that was set up in order to prevent the expansion of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, West Germany joined it. if that is not a red flag to a bull, I haven't got a clue what is. I really don't. West Germany, the country that invaded Russia and caused 27 million Russian deaths. The country that promoted and bore it produced Nazism and this exceptionally militant nationalism, and ended up with 27 million Russian deaths, has now been brought into the alliance within 10 years of those deaths to stand against the USSR. What the fuck? I didn't even know that. By the way, the prevention of militant nationalism is the second objective of NATO after preventing the USSR from expanding from its expansionist ideals. But of course, it seems to have determined that the prevention of militant nationalism doesn't apply to the Ukraine as long as the Ukraine is fighting Russians. Anyone killing Russians is good, right? It's good. It's good. Gotta kill them. They're not really human. They're Untermensch. They're not like us. They don't bleed like us. They don't breathe like us. They don't think like us. They're Untermensch. NATO can basically, and has basically, ignored the rampant state-sponsored, state-delivered militant nationalism within Ukraine, because attacking Russia can only ever be good to NATO. And that means the United States, the United Kingdom, the EU, the Western countries. Let's have a quick look at what Daniel Kovalik has written in LouRockwell.com. Why Russia's intervention in Ukraine is legal under international law. The argument can be made that Russia exercised its right for self-defense. This was written 2 days ago, April the 25th. For many years I have studied and given much thought to the UN Charter's prohibition against aggressive war. No one can seriously doubt that the primary purpose of the document, drafted and agreed to on the heels of the horrors of World War II, was and is to prevent war and to maintain international peace and security, a phrase that's repeated throughout.
Следственный комитет России возбудил уголовное дело в отношении заместителя командира.
I have no idea what that was. At the justices at Nuremberg, as they correctly concluded, to initiate a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. That is, war is the paramount crime because all of the evils we so abhor, genocide, crimes against humanity, etc., are the terrible fruits of the tree of war. In light of the above, this person, can't remember his name now, Daniel Kovalik, I have spent my entire adult life opposing war and foreign intervention. Of course, as an American, I have had ample occasion to do so, given that the US is, as Martin Luther King stated, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Similarly, Jimmy Carter recently stated, the US is the most warlike nation in the history of the world. Demonstrably true, of course. In my lifetime alone, the US has waged aggressive and unprovoked wars against countries such as Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, the former Yugoslavia, Iraq twice, Afghanistan, Libya, and Somalia. And this doesn't even count the numerous proxy wars the US has fought via surrogates, e.g. through the Contras in Nicaragua, various jihadist groups in Syria, through Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the ongoing war against Yemen. Indeed, through such wars, the US has done more, and intentionally so, than any nation on earth to undermine the legal pillars prohibiting war. It's in reaction to this, and with the express desire to try to salvage what is left of the UN Charter's legal prohibitions against aggressive war, that a number of nations, including Russia and China, founded the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter. In short, for the US to complain about Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a violation of international law is, at best, the pot calling the kettle black. Still, the fact the US is so obviously hypocritical in this regard does not necessarily mean Washington is automatically wrong. In the end, we have to analyse Russia's conduct on its own merits. You must begin this discussion by accepting the fact there was already a war happening in Ukraine for the 8 years preceding the Russian military incursion in February 2022. This war, by the government in Kiev, against the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donbass, a war which claimed the lives of around 14,000 people, many of them children, and displaced around 1.5 million more, even before Russia's military operation, has been arguably genocidal. That is, the government in Kiev, and especially its neo-Nazi battalions, Aidar, Azov, Donbass, C-14, Right Sector, and others, carried out attacks against these peoples with the intention of destroying, at least in part, the ethnic Russians precisely because of their ethnicity. While the US government and media are trying hard to obscure these facts, they are undeniable and were indeed reported by the mainstream Western press before it became inconvenient to do so. Thus, a commentary run by Reuters in 2018 clearly sets out how the neo-Nazi battalions have been integrated into the official Ukrainian military and police forces and are thus state, or at least quasi-state, actors for which the Ukrainian government bears legal responsibility. As the piece relates, there are 30-some right-wing extremist groups operating in Ukraine that have been formally integrated into Ukraine's armed forces, and that the more extreme among these groups promote an intolerant and illiberal ideology. Here's an interesting one for you, just as an aside. There is plenty of evidence that is out there, if you were to look for it, that states, because these groups came up at 2014 at the Maidan protest, that's where they came from. They have absolutely zero intention of joining the EU. They don't want to. If their government attempts to join the EU, they will go up against their government because it is against their Ukraine nationalism to become subservient to a larger group. They see themselves as supreme. And they actually promote that themselves. Zelensky went over when he first became president and spoke to these troops, and they laughed at him and completely ignored him. Can you imagine your commander-in-chief giving you orders and they tell you exactly where to get off and they are going to do what they wish?
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
That's what's ended up with Mr. Zelensky. He is no more Mr. Nice Guy. I'd love to know where he gets his $850 million wealth from. So, the more extreme among these groups promote an intolerant and illiberal ideology, and they are part of the state. That is, they possess and promote hatred towards ethnic Russians, the Roma peoples, and members of the LGBT community as well, and they act out this hatred by attacking, killing, and displacing these peoples. The piece cites the Western human rights group Freedom House for the proposition that an increase in patriotic discourse supporting Ukraine in its conflict with Russia has coincided with an apparent increase in both public hate speech, sometimes by public officials and magnified by the media, as well as violence towards vulnerable groups such as the LGBT community. And this has been accompanied by actual violence. For example, Azov and other militias have attacked anti-fascist demonstrations, city council meetings, media outlets, art exhibitions, foreign students, and Roma. Not only that, they go into... They act like the brown shirts, and they act like a police force on the streets, but of course their policing is to police according to their own ideals rather than liberal democracies that we seem to claim that we are like. As reported in Newsweek, Amnesty International had been reporting on these very same extremist hate groups and their accompanying violent activities as far back as 2014. It is this very type of evidence, public hate speech combined with large-scale systemic attacks on the targets of the speech, that has been used to convict individuals of genocide. For example, in the Rwandan genocide case against Jean-Paul Akayesu. To add to this, there are well over 500,000 residents of the Donbas region of Ukraine who are also Russian citizens, while the estimate was made in April 21, after Vladimir Putin's 2019 decree simplified the process of obtaining Russian citizenship for residents of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. This means that Russian citizens were being subjected to racialized attack by neo-Nazi groups integrated into the government of Ukraine and right on the border of Russia. Now, you may be going, Putin did something bad. He simplified the process so that they could get Russian citizenship. Well, the reason for this was because these people have been left without citizenship. Ukraine had determined that these people would no longer have Ukrainian citizenship. They could not get passports. They could not get citizenship. They could not get birth certificates. They could not get anything. They had to set up their own system, of which absolutely nobody recognized it. And it was only once Vladimir Putin had provided the process to obtain Russian citizenship that these people could actually get a passport and go anywhere. So you might say, why, if these people are all being bombed, why didn't they run away and try to go anywhere else? Because they had no means to do so. They had been de-citizenized. I've just made that word up. Yep. And lest Russia was uncertain about the Ukrainian government's intentions regarding the Russian ethnics in the Donbass, the government in Kiev passed new language laws in 2019, which made it clear Russian speakers were at best second-class citizens. Indeed, the usually pro-West Human Rights Watch expressed alarm about these laws, as HRW explained in an early 2022 report, which received nearly zero coverage in the Western media. The government in Kiev passed legislation which requires print media outlets registered in Ukraine to publish in Ukrainian. Publications in other languages must also be accompanied by a Ukrainian version equivalent in content, volume, and method of printing. Additionally, places of distribution such as newsstands, must have at least half their content in Ukrainian. And according to Human Rights Watch, Article 25 regarding print media outlets makes exceptions for certain minority languages, English and official EU languages, but not for Russian, emphasis added. The justification for that being the century of oppression of Ukrainian in favour of Russian. As Human Rights Watch explained, there are concerns about whether guarantees for minority languages are sufficient. The Venice Commission, the Council of Europe's top advisory body on constitutional matters, said several of the law's articles, including Article 25, failed to strike a fair balance between promoting the Ukrainian language and safeguarding minorities' linguistic rights. So just imagine you are a United States ethnic enclave in, I don't know, India. There's a good few 100,000 of you over there. But because you're United States citizens or of ethnicity of the United States, your past ancestors were from the United States and you spoke American, but you were brought up in India and you lived in India all your life, this was your home, you would not be classified as a minority. And you could be discriminated against in any way, shape or form because your ethnicity is American. Rah, 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 America, America, America. You could put British in there if you wish. You could put Australian in there if you wish. You could put any EU country in there if you wish. I chose the United States of America because it's the biggest proponent of NATO. It might ring true for a bunch more people. Moreover, as the Organisation of World Peace reported in 2021, according to Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council Decree number 117/2021, Ukraine is committed to putting all options on the table to taking back control over the Russian-annexed Crimea region. Signed on March 24th, President Zelensky has committed the country to pursue strategies that will prepare and implement measures to ensure the deoccupation and reintegration of the peninsula. Given that the residents of Crimea, most of whom are ethnic Russians, are quite happy with the current state of affairs under Russian governance, in fact they voted for it at over 90%, this, according to a 2020 Washington Post report, Zelensky's threat in this regard was not only a threat against Russia itself, but was also a threat of potentially massive bloodshed against a people who do not want to go back to Ukraine. Without more, this situation represents a much more compelling case for justifying Russian intervention under the responsibility to protect R2P doctrine, which has been advocated by such Western humanitarians as Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power and Susan Rice, and which was relied upon to justify the NATO interventions in countries like the former Yugoslavia and Libya. Moreover, none of the states involved in these interventions could possibly make any claims of self-defense. This is especially the case for the United States, which has been sending forces thousands of miles away to drop bombs on far-flung lands. This recalls to mind the words of the great Palestinian intellectual Edward Said, excuse me, who opined years ago in his influential work, Culture and Imperialism, that it is simply unfair to try to compare the empire building of Russia with that of the West. As Dr. Said explained, Russia acquired its imperial territories almost exclusively by adjacence. Unlike Britain and France, which jumped thousands of miles beyond their own borders to other continents, Russia moved to swallow whatever land or peoples stood next to its borders. But in the English and French cases, the sheer distance of attractive territories summoned the projection of far-flung interest. Such an observation is doubly applicable to the United States. Still, there is more to consider regarding Russia's claimed justifications for intervention. Not only are there radical groups on its border attacking ethnic Russians, including Russian citizens, but also these groups have reportedly been funded and trained by the United States with the very intention of destabilizing and undermining the territorial integrity of Russia itself. Yahoo explained January 2022 the CIA is overseeing a secret intensive training program in the US for elite Ukrainian special ops forces and other intelligence personnel, according to 5 former intelligence and national security officials familiar with the initiative. The program, which started in 2015, is based at an undisclosed facility in the southern US. According to some of these officials, the program has involved very specific training on skills that would enhance the Ukrainians' ability to push back against the Russians. The training, which has included tactical stuff, is going to start looking pretty offensive if Russians invade Ukraine. One person familiar with the program put it more bluntly: the United States is training an insurgency, adding that the program has taught the Ukrainians how to kill Russians. You know, if you actually just read those words, it sounds like they were written by a 7-year-old. I'm not sure I take any credence to any of that Yahoo document at all. Right. To remove any doubt that the destabilization of Russia itself has been the goal of the US in these efforts, and this is the important bit, one should examine the very telling 2019 report of the RAND Corporation, a long-time defense contractor called upon to advise the US on how to carry out its policy goals. In this report, entitled Overextending and Unbalancing Russia, Assessing the Impact of Cost-Imposing Options, one of the many tactics listed is providing lethal aid to Ukraine in order to exploit Russia's greatest point of external vulnerability. So the RAND Corporation in 2019, which links directly to the 2019 information that was provided in the video, what was that guy's name again? Arestovich, the head honcho advisor to Zelensky. That was in 2019 when he was talking very openly and candidly about having a big war with Russia. The RAND Corporation in the same year produced a report which is available. And here's the name of it. One of the many tactics listed is provide lethal aid to Ukraine in order to exploit Russia's greatest point of external vulnerability. If that is not a very clear indication of NATO, the US military might, the US desire to stab constantly at Russia, to get Russia to do stuff. We know the CIA was involved and the others were involved in the Maidan Revolution in order to overthrow the democratically elected pro-Russian president. We know that the right sector was funded by these Western spy service organizations and governments in order to destabilize that government. Again, in exactly the same way that funding went out originally to Al-Qaeda and originally to the people of Afghanistan when fighting against the Russians. Anybody that's an enemy of your enemy is your friend, and then they always end up not being your friend. In short, there's no doubt Russia has been threatened, and in quite a profound way, with concrete destabilizing efforts by the US, NATO and their extremist surrogates in Ukraine. I get the feeling Ukraine has been used here as well. They've been used, abused, and had their culture amended, pushed towards this Nazification that Russia says that they have to remove. Russia has been so threatened for a full 8 years. I think that's a very, very small number of years that it's actually talking about. And Russia has witnessed what such destabilizing efforts have meant for other countries, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria to Libya. That is nearly a total annihilation of the country as a functioning nation state. It's hard to conceive of a more pressing case for the need to act in defense of the nation. While the UN Charter prohibits unilateral acts of war, it also provides in Article 51 that nothing in the present Charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense. And this right of self-defense has been interpreted to permit countries to respond not only to actual armed attacks, but also to the threat of imminent attack. In light of the above, it's my assessment this right has been triggered in the instant case, and that Russia had a right to act in its own self-defense by intervening in Ukraine, which had become a proxy of the US and NATO for an assault, not only on Russian ethnics within Ukraine, but upon Russia itself. A contrary conclusion would simply ignore the dire realities facing Russia. Now, while I agree with this, most of this article, those are the person's opinions who wrote this. They express similar opinions to my own. I think we in the West have destabilized the whole area and provoked Russia into this over a long, long period. I think it's much more than 8 years. With our constant anti-Russia stuff. The next one's China. China has always been within the forefronts of people's ideas, especially in the United States. The United States is very, very worried about any of these rising developing nations actually overtaking economically and militarily. And yet, if you look at my last video, or my last but one, where I showed an interview on Sud Radio with the French economist Charles Gave, it will give a very clear indication of the stupidity of the West from his point of view, and what the outcome will be, which will be that Russia and China and India and Brazil and South Africa, the BRICS countries, and those other countries that actually have not fomented against them, we'll give it a few years and the tables will have turned. There will be the petro-ruble, not the petrodollar, and many other countries would have determined that the West is not the place to put your money, because if the West decides it doesn't like you for some reason, it's going to nick your bloody money. Anyway, that is about it. I do note Puffalopagus has been extremely active in this side chat, and I've not been able to read any of it. Hi, Puffalopagus. Hello, DW. Disney HIV positive. I will let you go for now. I've been on for much too long and kept everybody up. It is now much later on the late evening of the 27th of April 2022 here in the United Kingdom. I'll just I will send you out with a little something about what some certain people would like others to do if they were talking about the other.
Things that men do to upset women.
Breathe. Just stop it. We don't like it. It pisses us off. Stop breathing, okay?
No more Mr. Nice Guy.